Yo, what is up, Vibers? It is September 3rd, which means patch day, and we actually have a massive, beautiful patch hitting the breach today coming from Theorycraft. Again, a huge amount of changes targeted at community feedback that's been coming in since 1.0. In this video, we're going to look through all the changes together. All that's going to be timestamped so you can find your way around. So right at the beginning here, we see map changes. We see new Hunter Mastery skins introduced, as well as a lot of item balancing taking place. And we can see this is live as of this morning, September 3rd, 8 a.m. Greetings, Supervivors. In this patch, we have some changes to the breach map to add more land masses and unique combat spaces, the release of free mastery skins for each hunter. That's pretty cool. And a major balance pass across our item pool. Read on. All right, so this first big chunk is going to be on a hunter balance. We see Tetra, Beebo, Wukong, Kingpin, Shiv, as well as some kind of QoL for the rest of the cast. So let's go through this in detail real quick. Starting with Tetra. We want Tetra to be self-sufficient damage dealer, but her ability to siege and deal burst damage has been feeling high overall. We're reducing the damage on her Rock Wave plus Quake Punch combo and making the counterplay of destroying her walls a little more accessible to foes in the early game. So basically what this equates to is a bit of a nerf on her rock explosions from her LMB. So whether she punches her walls or whether she shoots her walls, both of those result in these exploding rocks, right? So on these rock fireballs, the armor shred has been decreased by 20% from 50 to 30 right here. We see the explosion damage decreased by a bit as well, and we also see the projectile damage decreased. Along with that, they are reducing the health of her walls in early game and making them sort of scale into late game so that they are more easy to kill early on. Moving down to Beebo, who I have actually been playing for a bit for the first time due to the guide I recorded with Protofo that is now published on the channel. We posted this weekend, so if you want to see some really deep Beebo tech with Protofo, recommend checking that out. And Protofo might be the most disappointed player in these fast car changes, but Beebo just has so much in his kit, I definitely think he's still going to work. So it says, Beebo has been overperforming in a large part due to both his high mobility uptime and consistent access to high-speed Talk engages from outside vision. We're adjusting his shift cooldown to bring his mobility profile a little more under control. We've also made it so Beebo no longer benefits from incremental forces during Talk, so its output in the combat sandbox are more knowable and less jarring. We're keeping an eye on this ability in general and will adjust its base speed and acceleration to make sure that it's still viable moving forward. And if you're not familiar with Beebo's kit, basically the Talk is generally kind of hard to hit, especially if enemies can see you just straight on without any boost to it. You can do things like start it into a deployable fan or drive it through a bungee in order to increase the speed, and this is called fast car. So we can see the adjustment here is basically eliminating that. Beebo can no longer gain or lose speed from external forces while in his car to remove this fast car mechanic. I think it's a little weird to call it an exploit because they have recognized that it's in the game and not removed it before. But tomatoes. And then alongside that, we basically have a mobility reduction to his dash. We can see the dash cooldown increased basically by 2 seconds across the board. Yeah, it's a 2-second increase at every level now. Moving on to our most contentious hunter, Wukong here. We got our L Wukong versus our W Wukong squads going at it constantly. Even after the changes in 1.02, Wukong is still getting too much value from off-screen RMB engages and has been able to consistently dunk enemies who are at high health. These nerfs to cooldown damage and dash interactions on his RMB are intended to make him fairer to play against and more conversational against the rest of the roster. We've also adjusted his ultimate to apply his vulnerability a little later into the spell so that Wukong players have to exercise more judgment in its activation, and catching the monkey is more of an option. So what does this actually equate to in abilities? We can see here, basically the cooldown on the RMB has been increased to 12 seconds at every level, so it no longer decreases as you level it up. Base damage has been decreased, not at level 1, but by a little bit at level 2 and by a significant margin at level 3. And the ability damage scaling multiplier here has been adjusted basically in the same way, where it actually is no longer going to scale with level. It's going to be a 0.15 multiplier at every level. This is probably the biggest one right here, and probably the main one people are going to feel on both sides, like playing as Wukong and playing against Wukong. Dashing while having RMB active. So like once you go up on the pole and let go and you're trying to dash slam that RMB forward, now is going to reduce the dash speed by between 16.7 and 33% based on the staff charge. So depending on how high you go on your pole, which remember just as base Wukong mechanics increases the hitbox size of the RMB, the more now your dash is going to be slowed based on how high you go on your staff. Additionally, a very good change just for readability is that Wukong is now always going to be visible between perch and slam. So when he gets up on his pole and goes to slam you, you are going to be able to see him even if he's out of vision. This is one of the biggest complaints I see from high elo players, basically that he can just slam you from over a wall and you have literally no idea he's there. Finally, we see this last change of the iframe, basically giving you a 1/4 second to try to crowd control him before the iframe goes off. Now, I'm not sure if you do get crowd controlled before the iframe goes through, if you're actually going to get caught or not. We'll have to see how this kind of plays out. All right, moving on to our boy Kingpin. With the dunk changes that went in for 1.02, Kingpin's Abyss gameplay has felt more lacking. We're looking to provide him with some new options and combos here. We'll continue monitoring Kingpin going forward to see if more support is needed. So for those that aren't familiar, a huge part of Kingpin's kit was essentially being able to reliably dunk off of his grab. These changes to the grab, the RMB, the hook, are essentially trying to give him more agency now that that dunk is not guaranteed. So we can see hooking over the Abyss causes Kingpin to hover. So now Kingpins don't have to do the double dash in order to slam over Abyss. This is going to be a huge kind of thing for Kingpin because he's not going to have to consume those dash charges in order to land the dunk. This is a new and very interesting mechanic. Hook targets always end with their back facing the Kingpin. If you're not familiar with Kingpin's kit, his passive gives him backstab damage against anyone facing the other way. And kind of paired with this, we can see targets are going to be micro yaw locked at the end of the hook for 0.15 seconds. So what that means is your back's going to be to him for just a split second. After you get grabbed, you're not going to be able to turn your back and face him. So Kingpin's going to have a very quick moment where he can essentially guaranteed backstab you after the grab. Moving down to Shiv, we basically see another adjustment to her damage. It's kind of been yo-yoing back and forth since the 1.0 launch here, and they're essentially reverting part of her previous nerf, giving her some of her damage back on her LMB. It says, given Shiv's performance data on 1.02 and changes this patch to items such as Vive Infuser, Sunweaver, and Rocket High Top, so essentially taking into account that 3 of her most powerful items are getting nerfed as well, we felt it was appropriate to give her some damage back on her LMB. So Shiv is getting that 15% back on her LMB, and we'll really have to see, you know, with these nerfs to these items she likes to use, how much this really ends up kind of affecting her. 15% is a lot though, so she definitely is going to feel some of her burst back. Now, finally getting into some of the like QoL bug fixes for a lot of the different hunters in general, we have B-hopping visualization. So LMB impulse decays now have a debuff icon on the right of the HUD for Zeph, Jin, Wukong, and Tetra. So these hunters that you're able to leverage movement with their left mouse button, a lot of times what we call Shmovin Tech, they've been adding sort of impulse decays to these for these different hunters over the release of them coming out. I think Tetra is actually the first one that came out with an impulse decay built into her LMB, sort of expecting people to use it in this way. But now this decay will be visualized by a debuff, so you'll actually know how decayed you are and kind of how long until it falls off. I think this is really good for sort of readability for kits. We see bug fix for Eva, rank 4, right mouse button properly increases the size of orbs by 25%. We see bug fix for Jin, flip slash will no longer be spammed repeatedly when holding or spamming the input. For those that were confused about the level 4 Abyssal Grasp for Kingpin, that is now fixed, so the rank up info and tooltip are correct now. For Mercury, Golden Beam should now properly damage Sky Sharks, and Backblast should no longer hit enemies through terrain. For Saros, camera no longer zooms out when leveling the ability using hotkeys. Shiv's Fusillade no longer deals excess bonus damage when hitting enemies on the outer ring. That's very interesting. That's basically a little nerf. Maybe another reason why they are giving that LMB damage back that we saw above. Tetra's Rock Wall projectile should no longer reset, so less ult cooldown if she's hit by them while ulting. That's a crazy bug. Volcano Crusher should not randomly reset. That's good. LMB melee flick tech to hit multiple enemies in an arc should no longer be possible. So there's some characters. It's funny they removed this from Tetra, but I'm pretty sure Brawl can still do this with his RMB tap. If you basically pivot it really fast, like if you whip it, you can sort of hit multiple people in that cone rather than it just being that tiny hitbox. So they removed this from Tetra's LMB, but as far as I know, it remains on Brawl's RMB. Why? Void Snap Them Up Mastery Mission can now be progressed in Arena. I think this is the one. If you guys have ever noticed when you get killed by a Void, they almost always shift swap your Wisp. That's because they're farming mastery. That's not because that's the play. That's because that's Void's, like one of Void's 3 mastery things that he's trying to like complete. I think that's probably this one, Snap Them Up. So now that one can be progressed in Arena. And then Zeph, the tap case behavior of the LMB has been improved to be snappier. So if you're just tapping it rather than doing the hold for the specific charge, apparently will go quicker. All right, moving down to a really exciting section where they're basically adding some little islands and more combat space in these areas of giant abyss that were created with the big map change that came with 1.0. So we can see, as discussed in our latest dev blog, we've been working on some breach updates to ensure we're hitting the right blend of land and abyss, as well as making different zones of the map feel unique. The goal is to make sure we're providing meaningfully different combat variety, especially in late game circles over the course of multiple games. Also says thank you to many of our high elo players who gave feedback on which area of the maps needed the most love. The following map zones have been updated with additional land masses and islands, so let's kind of check out these before and afters. Here is Enshrine before, here is Enshrine after. So basically removing these giant storm clouds, extending this island out quite a bit here, like this, adding these kind of bridges connecting over here, and then adding these cool grind rail like crate extensions coming off of the train tracks here. So really going to be like way more of a playable space here, like in between Enshrine, Mana Coils, and Prisma Falls. I'm actually really excited about this one. We can see Dawn Caps as well. Got a little bit of an adjustment, not quite as crazy. Basically, this little island and some kind of ice added, as well as some additional like VFX. Taking a look at Underrot, kind of a similar situation where not a huge adjustment, but we see a little bit of kind of a pathway going between Scav Bay and Underrot here, where they cut a kind of path through this storm cloud. Now we got a little island, two little islands to kind of work off of in this big gap right here. We see a small adjustment to Shards of Fate here with a similar kind of thing, a pretty small addition of like more ice and an extra little island right here. I really like this adjustment to Catacombs, and I'm really hoping with the adjustments they've been making to the circle, we will get kind of more circles closing in on this bottom left side of the map, because this is a really cool Catacombs adjustment, basically just getting rid of this whole storm cloud and adding another kind of big island to play around between this shop and basically what is Catacomb and then Cold Fang, like down to the right of this, right? I also really like this Ion Acres change. They're basically turning this island into two islands connected by these bridges, basically giving a lot more kind of like playable space between our like Vane Grove and Ion Acres areas here. We have these changes to Mage Bog, and I'm honestly sort of struggling to even figure out what exactly changed here. Perhaps I think they pulled the island maybe down a little bit, so it's kind of closer to Mage Bog, perhaps. I'm not really sure. Similarly, a pretty small change to this area between Race Row, Gridlock, and Machine, which is not a ton added again, but I think kind of like the positioning of stuff adjusted a little bit. There's this island that kind of connects these two spaces that the wind path now goes through. This was kind of moved up like in between. So again, not huge adjustments, but little things that kind of increase the, you know, sandbox playground. We do see it looks like a little bit of these, I think these are these spike turbines kind of added along the walls here. Oh, and we do see a giant grind rail added here as well. That's cool. I always like more grind rails. So yeah, definitely a few more kind of options moving through this area. All right, we are moving right along. Next, we have this change to the mini map and drop colors, which is really interesting. It says we're removing the ability to identify a specific team from their drop pod color in order to prevent cases where players are target dropping on no teams, no fills, etc. Now the drop pad map colors are going to be red for enemy, blue for ally, and yellow for self, and spectator is still going to see the team colors. We see a really interesting change to ally recall here. This is, I think, really going to kind of mix things up more than we're used to. We want solo play to be more viable, especially for protector mains. Currently, recalling to an ally silences your character, meaning if you do so in the middle of combat, you end up completely helpless. We hope that by removing the silence, teammates will be able to more effectively support one another and stay together as they navigate the breach. So recalling to an ally has changed from a significant nerf to a significant buff. So now the recalling ally, instead of being silenced for 5 seconds, the recalling ally is going to deal 30% more damage and apply 30% increased crowd control duration for 5 seconds. A very kind of significant buff on top of the fact that they are no longer going to be silenced, so they can actually use all their abilities right when they recall to you. So this is going to add a lot more situations where you think you maybe have someone caught out and their ally can actually recall to them and help defend them. We're going to have to see how this one plays out, because the silence was initially added to this because the recall was sort of getting abused and people could never, you know, punish positioning for someone being like caught out away from their teammates. So this is like a really interesting change that we're really gonna have to like kind of wait and see how it ends up feeling for everyone. Next, we're taking a look at map and macro with quality of life and bug fixes. So Sky Sharks, it should be easier to get into a Sky Shark without accidentally jumping right back out again. That'll be nice. Bug causing stuttery / stuck movement when the client became stuck in the ADS zoom state of the client, but not on the server, should be resolved. So I think this is referring to the control bug that's been in the game for a very long time. They partially fixed it last patch, but it's still been happening to a lesser degree. And so this hopefully is going to completely remove that for the game once and for all. And that has been a really hard bug for them to pin down. So hopefully this resolves it, and that would be really good. Finally, fixing this Prisma Extractor bug. The Prisma Extractor icon should no longer be stuck on the map after an extractor has been destroyed prior to completing the extraction. Finally, coming down to items here, we see Relics and Grips getting buffed, and then we see Relics and Grips getting nerfed, and then we see a big kind of reduction to ability haste from like a math level here, and then we get into consumables and a little more stuff at the end. So we've got a set of buffs to some of our underperforming Relics and Grips. Our main goals here are to increase the viable options and give players more appealing choices, particularly for defensive items. We're also interested in making Festering Jawblade more of an appealing tech choice against healers, especially in a world where Healing Amp is more powerful. All right, so what does this actually look like? Battle Gum, we see cooldown decreased at 2-star. We see max distance of the connection increased by 30% at 3-star. We see a buff to Stasis Shard now gives you immunity to enemy roots, stuns, grounds while in stasis, and they're looking to make this more of like an actual Zhonya's type item in future patches where it would essentially make you immune to displacements. And in my opinion, this is by far the kind of weakest part of Stasis Shard. Is if you pop it, now you're going to be immune to everything, but you are not immune to impulse. So you can still be knocked around, knocked off a ledge, like, you know, it really eliminates the effectiveness of actually going into stasis, being able to be moved still. Really interesting change to Gorger talents here. The overheal shield no longer drops off, but the shield is actually capped based on star level. So I can tell you, like playing on Ghost, if you drop all your abilities with Gorger on like a boss that you're fighting over, trying to snipe it, like with your napalm, you can get over half of your health in Gorger shield, and that is no longer going to be the case. It's going to be capped at 360 at the highest level. But at the same time, you're going to be able to carry that shield in between combat. So this is like maybe slightly more of a nerf than a buff, if we're being real. But this is a buff. This is a nerf. See a nice little increase to Bubble Frog outbound healing, jumping it up by 2% at the 2-star and 5% extra outbound healing at 3-star. We see a tiny buff to the health increase for Titanic Bond, bringing it up 1% at 2-star and 1% at 3-star. But the big thing is they added this inbound healing amp of 10%. So Titanic Bond going to be, you know, leveraging that ability to tank by making healing on you if you're wearing it more effective. Really like this, actually. I really like this change to Festering Jawblade. It's just going to give big Omnivamp flat, which is going to give it kind of way more value to just be picked up in general, even if you're not activating it. But additionally, the Omnivamp on the active was dropped down just a little bit, 5%, to account for the extra 10% that was added that's on all the time. And we also see this cooldown reduction, basically 5 seconds at all star levels, to make the active kind of more usable. So I think Festering Jawblade going to have decent amount more kind of viability now. And our final kind of buff to our relics is going to be Paladin's Primer. Immunity to slows and anti-heal increased to 1.5 seconds. All right, now taking a look at nerfs to relics and grips. It says, as players have started to star up their items, we're getting a lot more data about what's standing out from the rest. We're nerfing the biggest overperformers. So we can see here, Grabby the Squid, a big one. The cooldown at 3-star reduced from, I swear it was 2 seconds to 8 seconds on terrain hit. This is a huge nerf to Uppercutless. Now is going to give a 360 HP shield instead of the iframe invulnerability. So the kind of Uppercutless defensive is going to be much different now. Another really big nerf coming through on GA Guardian Angel, mainly removing the box revive mechanic. So this was essentially what used to be on the Arc Guardian Angel, this ability for you to basically use it on boxes and revive them like they were wisps. That has been completely removed now from the 3-star GA. In addition to that, there's been a minor reduction even in the wisp revive rate for the GA itself. So GA getting hit pretty dang hard here. We see another nerf coming in to Rocket High Tops here, bringing it from 20 to 15%, where we saw the first nerf bringing it from 25 to 20%. So continuing to kind of reduce the speed that's gained on your impulse from dashing with the high tops. I think a result of these continuing to be so strong is that there's literally no other good options besides like Bloodlust for certain hunters and very niche cases for the dash haste on face striders. But we just need more boots, like cooler options. Coming out of Thunderbolt, we see a big nerf to level 3 Thunderbolt. The base damage dropped by 60 here at 3-star. The AP multiplier dropped by 0.2, so like a third off of the AP multiplier, as well as the damage per level scale down. So Thunderbolt getting a big kind of damage decrease at the level 3. Similar thing with Burning Palm here. Instead of scaling by 1% each level, it's going to scale by 0.3% each level. That's going to result in a 3-star burning for 3.6 max health damage per tick instead of 5. A bit of a nerf to Vibe Infuser, not a crazy nerf, so it's still going to be pretty dang strong. Basically bringing the missing health percentage heal down 2.5% at 2 and 3-star, and then bringing the heal over time on the 3-star down 2.5%. So it's going to be a little less healing, but I think Vibe Infuser is going to be just fine and still be very strong still. And then we see pretty much like overall base damage decrease to Sunweaver with base damage at 3-star reduced by 20. And this is like a big reduction at 2-star, right? It used to jump to 80 at 2-star. Now it's down to 45 at 2-star, 60 at 3-star. And then we see 3 damage per level instead of 4 at 2 and 3-star. And then the level 3 heal on hit has been reduced by 25 as well. So Sunweaver getting a pretty significant nerf as well here. All right, now moving down to kind of maybe the real like worst defender as far as like items or stats go in SUPERVIVE right now. And that is ability haste also known as cooldown reduction. And here is like an overall nerf to this mechanic. Very interesting, and I think probably overall very healthy for the game state. So we can see ability haste continues to be the most warping stat across our items. When cooldowns on hunters are too low, players are unable to punish key abilities, and combat often starts to feel monotonous. While adjusting from the previous patch helped somewhat, you were still able to stack enough cooldown reduction items to cast at too high a frequency. As a result, we're adjusting the underlying math to both nerf the value of the stat and make it easier to balance going forward. Get your graphing calculators out. All right, so here we see the stat itself, ability haste as a stat. So the base exponent has been reduced from 1 over 1.25 raised to whatever our variable is, basically dropped by 0.1 here. So 0.15 instead of 0.25 raised to our variable. And the way the math plays out with this, they say broadly represents a 20% reduction in ability haste across the board. So along with this kind of overall stat reduction, we see a couple other items called out specifically in addition. The first one being Ultimate Diadem here, refund per stacked on Ultimate, reduced to 5% at 3-star instead of 10%, as well as the damage bonus decreased for early star levels. So basically at max star level, you're getting the same bonus damage, but you're losing half of your normal cooldown reduction from hitting abilities. And we can see this big change to Sombo and Chrono Gauge, which I think was kind of broken and overpowered from the beginning. Cooldown refund no longer applies to shift abilities. And I always thought it was weird that these were refunding shift cooldown when shift is actually a completely separate stat that's dash haste. It's not ability haste. And so even though the effects on these items aren't directly giving the ability haste stat, they were basically made to reduce the cooldowns of abilities. And a while ago, they basically removed shift from being an ability. It's considered a dash, not an ability. That's why there's dash haste and ability haste. All right, now we see another kind of change to emergency platform here in line with the dunking changes that happened last patch. So it says, we want dunking to remain exciting while giving opponents ways to play around them. Emergency platforms as a hard counter to dunks on reaction was too forgiving for the platform user. Defensive uses of emergency platform can still be viable with this change, but you'll have to read a little more into the future than activating on reaction. So we can see here, emergency platform, instead of casting instantly, is now going to cast after a 0.3 second delay. So it seems like you're actually going to have to read the dunk beforehand rather than popping it afterwards to save yourself. And also says if used over Abyss, it's going to float the caster for this duration. So it might still be plenty effective for canceling dunks, but you might basically have to activate it ahead of time. We'll have to see how these end up actually playing out. Taking a look at quality of life and bug fixes for items, we see a visual effects update for Wildfire Drive and Paladin's Primer. Both of those look pretty cool. They showed those last week in the devblog update. We see Resonating Idol re-enabled with these ability haste changes. So Resonating Idol now works correctly with various sources. Beebo's Bomb, Mercury's Golden Beam now properly reduces the cooldown of Beebo's Bomb. Mercury's Golden Beam should now work correctly with Resonating Idol. Also a buff to Orb of Life. It should now revive you at full health instead of 1/3 HP. So if you get the Orb of Life res, you're gonna have a much better shot of actually surviving that and fighting your way out of there. So we can see changes to modes here. A really nice balanced touch to Arena. I really like this. Basically kind of eliminating or changing the two worst offenders in the kind of Arena mode right now. It says Contract Killer was meant to allow Snowball in Breach, but was unintentionally warping in Arena. Similarly, respawn beacon timings tuned for Breach don't make sense in a mode where there's only ever 2 teams. Respawn timers have been adjusted so that it's still viable as a strategy, but overall more contestable for enemies. So res beacon timers reverted to their original time, which I believe was 12 seconds in the beginning, as well as Contract Killer gold on knock reduced by 10-fold. So you're only going to get 25 gold per knock instead of 250. And so this no longer essential to kind of pick up first round of Arena. And the beacons are going to be way more kind of normal to play around, let's say. All right, we have another new event, this time with a skin, just like the first one we got with the Ghost skin for day 7. This is a similar login event, it seems like. So on your 7th day of logging in, you're going to get all this stuff. 2,000 Prisma, Rare Capsule, 120 VP, the stuff you can spend for skins, Epic Plus Capsule, 4,000 Prisma, Legendary Capsule, and then on day 7, a Varsity Zeph skin. Really excited to see what that one looks like. And then along that same line of thought, this is really cool. Basically for free, we're now getting a free skin for every single hunter. And all it's going to take is level 3 mastery, which is actually not that hard to do. So if you're, kind of like a collector and you're wanting to grab a skin for every hunter, this is going to be a free, fun way to kind of do that, where you play the hunter enough to kind of really understand them around mastery level 3, and you're going to get one of these new skins unlocked as part of the mastery milestones. And I just got to say, for everything that's been going on, for them to add, you know, however many hunters we have, like 18, whatever it is now, like new skins, just kind of out of nowhere, like that's actually so kind of huge and cool. Like what a cool thing to do, right? All right, finally coming down to the end here, we have general quality of life bug fixes. In-game invites. Invite notification stack is now only displayed in the escape menu while in-game. Incoming party invites or requests will generate a chat text message, so they won't just get lost to space-time and you never know who invited you. And EOG and spectator screens now include a button to call your attention to incoming party fights. Fixed a bug that prevented team and party voice volume sliders from working properly. Chat should now auto-scroll down automatically when new messages are sent. And German localization improved display of umlauts, I don't know what that is, in abilities and mastery titles. And boom, that is the end of our 1.03 patch notes. So actually, you know, a really, really big patch and a lot of really cool changes coming in, very focused on a lot of the feedback, as well as some cool new event stuff just for free, right? The free skin from this login event, and then now all these new skins getting added to the Hunter Mastery. Like, I think this is like a big W patch, like a lot of really, really good stuff here. Obviously, much more work to be done, but I think Theorycraft really kind of heading in the right direction here for a much more positive future of SUPERVIVE with all these kind of changes stacked up. So very excited to play this patch, and not only that, but also to kind of see what the next slew of changes are going to be coming in 2 weeks and 2 weeks after that as they continue kind of fine-tuning these patches and patch cycles. So as we pan all the way back up to the top of this massive patch, I just want to thank you so much for watching. Remind you to take care of yourself and keep vibing. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.